Today we're going to be learning a little bit about intervals. And intervals are the way that we measure distances between notes. So we're going to learn about three types of intervals today. We're going to learn about half steps, whole steps, and octaves. You've probably heard all of these words before. A half step is the smallest distance between two consecutive notes or letters. Some examples of half steps that we've played in our music are F sharp to G, B to C natural, or D to the new E flat that we've been working on recently. A whole step is the distance created equal to two half steps between consecutive notes or letters. So E to F sharp, C natural to D, or A to B. Now we're going to look at them in a scale to see how a scale is built using whole steps and half steps. To understand what an octave is, we need to examine the notes of a scale. So I've written the notes of the D scale here. So an octave is the distance between the first note of the scale and the eighth note of a scale. So an octave always has the same letter. So from a D string to a high D would be an example of an octave. So if I say notes are an octave apart, then I'm talking about skipping from the low D to that high D. If I'm saying it is a one octave scale, I'm saying that scale is built with 8 notes between the low D and the high D. So if we say playing a D one octave scale, this is our example. So let's examine the D scale to find where our half steps are. So as we play the scale, F sharp to G is one of the half steps, and C sharp to high D is another half step. So there are 2 half steps within 1 octave of a scale. And if we examine the distance between each of the other notes, we realize they're going to be a whole step. So there becomes a formula that we can use to build scales. So between D and E is a whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So the formula to build a major scale, which is what we are learning in class, is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. When you're trying to figure out if a note is a whole step or a half step apart, try imagine it. When you're trying to figure out if a note is a whole step or a half step apart, try imagining it on your instrument, how you might play it, where your fingers go, the distance between your tapes. Those can all be helpful things. So let's take a look at a few examples. So in the first column, I have listed examples of notes that are all a half step apart, and some of them go forwards and some of them go backwards. So it doesn't matter if we go from a lower note to a higher note or a higher note to a lower note. What matters is the distance apart they are. So for example, E to F natural is a half step, but E to F sharp is a whole step. Okay, so D to E flat, that pulled back first finger compared to the open string, that is a half step. Whereas D string compared to first finger on the tape is a whole step. Now here's an example of going backwards. Think of your high D and your C sharp and compare it to your high D and your C natural. So this is the half step and here's the whole step. One more example going backwards, we have C natural to B. Think of A string, okay? Second finger, first finger, and now C sharp to be. So this is the half step and this is the whole step.